Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Reggie Marra, speaking on coaching and healing. Reggie is a certified integral master coach and a partner with Paradox Edge, a business coaching and consulting firm. He is also an educator and teaching poet, a former teacher, basketball coach, and administrator in secondary and higher education. Reggie engages his clients with integral applications and writing as tools for alleviating unnecessary suffering through an exploration of identity, perspective, and purpose. Reggie has presented his poetry in workshops for the National Association for Poetry Therapy, the Transformative Language Arts Network, the National Speakers Association, the Iona Spiritual Institute, Tech Canada, and Vistage USA, among other associations. In 2013, Reggie released the revised edition of his book, The Quality of Effort, which delivers a powerful message of hope filled with humanity and honest answers to questions we sometimes think about but may not want to ask ourselves. Reggie is also a certified Leadership Agility 360 coach, and he holds an A.C.C. credential with the International Coach Federation. Reggie's intelligence, insight, caring nature, and honesty is obvious in his work, his poetry, his presentations, and his coaching. Reggie, we're delighted to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Christine and Bob, and I'm delighted to be here as well. I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation.
Great, Reggie. I want to thank you for coming today, and welcome to our audience.
Reggie, tell us about yourself and what led you to do the work you're currently doing.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking that. From as far back as I can remember, I've been guiding and teaching and coaching. Even when I was in high school, it's something that just occurred to me. My senior year in high school, when there were teachers out on occasion, I was asked to go in and actually substitute for freshman classes in both algebra and in Spanish, which is interesting to me as I look back on that now. But you know, my earliest work coming out of college was in coaching basketball and teaching high school, and I gradually realized that I was more interested in helping others grow and see themselves more clearly than in communicating any particular content. So over a period of time, from full-time teaching to administrating to becoming a teaching poet and gradually an integral master coach, I've found more and more, I think, powerful technologies and ways into helping others grow and see themselves more clearly, which I derive a great sense of joy from doing that.
Oh, thank you. I can imagine that. It must be very fulfilling. Reggie,
Yeah.
You've, as you said, you've been an educator, an athletic coach, and now you're serving as an integral coach. What are the distinctions of the integral coaching method?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for asking that as well. I mean, I trained as an integral coach with Integral Coaching Canada, and the specific distinctions of their method and process, as succinctly as I can state them. First of all, it's a developmental process. It's not just situational where I would be a thought partner for a client and help him or her see some things a little bit differently, but it actually takes a client in a specific topic or issue and helps develop their perspective. So it's not advice-giving, but it's growth-invoking. It's grounded in Robert Kegan's subject-object theory, and to make that more palpable or easier to digest, what that simply means is it allows us to take what we were looking through and look at it. So a simple example of that is if I were somehow bigoted and I were looking through a bigoted lens at the world, that's my subject. That's how I'm looking through things. If one day I was able to see that bigotry, now it's an object and I can actually do something with it and maybe move through it. So it uses Kegan's subject-object approach. It uses Ken Wilber's transcend and include approach. Development means that we transcend where we've been, but we still include the best parts of it. We don't completely deny what used to be true. And then it uses Ken Wilber's AQUIL approach, all quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. And we can say more about that if you want, but basically that's arguably the most comprehensive and balanced and inclusive model for what it means to be a human being in the 21st century, at least that I've come across, and the folks at Integral Coaching Canada seem to think so too. So that's a real brief summary.
That's an excellent brief summary, and I mean, I can see the validity of that. Your clients, do they seek you out knowing this about your work, or do you give them a little explanation of this? Because this is something I think many people are not familiar with.
Yeah. In fact, unless someone knows about Ken Wilber's work or Robert Keegan's work, and I have had some clients that have known about that, I'll never mention it. Because the coaching isn't about teaching them an integral model. It's about helping them develop in an issue in their life or through an issue in their life that deeply matters to them. So the theory isn't important. I've found that most clients don't really care what my background is. They care that I'm effective. And so unless somebody begins asking how I'm doing what I'm doing or what my training is, I just do the coaching. And all of Keegan's and Wilber's work and the actual integral coaching model, that's just my process behind the scenes, but it's not something I would necessarily speak about.
Okay, wonderful.
Oh, Reggie, that's wonderful the way that you've described that. In my particular case, I have a fascination with Ken Wilber's models of the world. As you know, Ken Wilber has been a prolific writer and is an amazing intellectual and scholar, etc. I would like you to just briefly go into his four-quadrant model and as well as the AQAL, because I think that although you might not ordinarily tell a client that, or a prospective client that, there would be some people who would find it interesting. For example, in my own research, in my own study of mother loss and existential grief, I use Ken Wilber's four-quadrant model to clearly identify the distinctions between first and second person bodily felt sense. And so although, in a normal, if I were in a bar and we were watching the Super Bowl, no one would be interested in that, of course. But I think on an everyday experience, once you explain to people clearly, well, these things can sometimes be felt in the body and that our body is intelligent and it's not just a theory. So could you just talk about that a little bit, Ken Wilber's model, how, because I think it is very interesting how evolved and how useful it is.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So real quickly, the AQUIL, AQAL, stands for all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states, and all types. And I'll touch on each of those briefly. The quadrants are basically four essentially irreducible parts of our lives: the interior and exterior of individuals and groups, or individuals and collectives. And what that basically means is we each have an individual interior. That's my values, my beliefs, my worldview, basically. And nobody knows about that unless I share it with them, rather. So that's the individual interior. Then there's an individual exterior, and that's the quadrant that speaks about behavior and experience, things that we can actually see and observe and experience through our senses. Then there's the interior of the collective or group, and that's basically relationship or culture. And then there's the exterior of a collective or group, and that's systems or the environment, both the human-made environment, buildings and the internet and phone lines, and the natural environment, the oceans and forests and trees. So if you take those four together, my individual interior, my individual exterior, my relationships and culture, and my environment and the systems within which I live, all of those affect me, and I influence each of them as well. So that those are really important parts of anybody's life. And even watching the Super Bowl in the bar, as you said, even in that bar, that's actually a system in and of itself. That's in a specific environment. the people in there each have an individual worldview, and they're there that night because they're watching the Super Bowl and they value professional sports. Their behavior, rather than sitting at home, to take that example, led them to sit in a bar, and probably part of that was because of that interior collective value system where they really value the relationship and the culture of football fans sitting in the bar, having a drink, and enjoying the game together. So it's everywhere, even in that bar that you mentioned. So that's just the quadrants. The levels refer to levels of development. And I'm not going to say too much about that, but basically the research on worldviews and levels of development and structures of consciousness, whether you look at Robert Kegan's work or Ken Wilber's work or lots of other model builders and researchers, they agree on a lot of the levels of development. And probably the easiest way to see that in our culture is around election years. If you look at the differences between, let's say, conservative Republicans, moderate Democrats, and liberal Democrats, those are very, very distinct worldviews that very, very often are evidence of levels of adult development. Then there's lines of development, also known as multiple intelligences. You can be very advanced cognitively, maybe not so advanced in a moral line. Spiritual development is part of that. Somatic development or kinesthetic development, interpersonal skills. So those are different lines of development that each of us is able to grow through as well. States refer to both moment-to-moment moods, but also to these bigger states of consciousness which we move through every day. Waking state, which is what the three of us are in right now, I hope. Deep dreamless sleep, which I actually skipped the middle one there, and the dream state. So really, really briefly, those are the three overarching states of consciousness. And then types. There are masculine and feminine types, and there are personality types, there are body types. So if we take all of that together, the quadrants, the levels, lines, the states, and the types, integral coaching uses them to both look at the client, to kind of get a sense of who this person really is in the world, and as a coach, I do my best to look as the client as well, to try to get into what it feels like for my client to experience and see the world as he or she does through these lenses, the quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. So it's pretty rigorous. It's very effective, and as I think I said this, but it was the most rigorous and effective and comprehensive model of coaching I could find out there, and I wanted to engage it for those reasons.
Reggie, thank you for that answer. While you were talking, what came to mind, since I brought up the bar example, what I was thinking is that the World Cup is going on right now, and so literally over 1 billion people are watching that on various forms of media, in addition to the people who are there in Brazil watching it. And I'm asking this question from your perspective as not just an integral coach, but how you have been a real athletic coach. And so your perspective, what I'm specifically focusing on was the goal that was scored by the Brazilian player in the wrong net. And so I imagine, that is one of the most catastrophic things that can happen in a sporting match where you score for the wrong team, especially, when all the money's on the line. Can you just talk about that aspect from the perspective of how the integral model increases self-awareness and potentials for transformation? What I'm looking at in particular is that, soccer is the most popular sport pretty much worldwide, but still here in the United States, we have basketball and football and hockey that capture people's attention. So I'm wondering, you as a coach, athletic coach, and as an integral coach, what is your perspective on how that translates in terms of moving people towards more self-awareness and the potential for self-transformation?
Okay, I don't know that I can. If I'm going to tie that in too specifically with his scoring, the goal in the wrong net, but I think I can address that. The first thing that integral coaching does is identify for a client what we'll call a current way of being, and that's simply how the client currently sees and acts and even assesses or checks how things are going in the topic they come to coaching with. So the first thing we'll do is actually get the client to become as acutely aware of how they currently are in the topic, and we do something called a self-observation exercise, and but really want them to see how they are, to become very self-aware of how they are in this topic and how the topic their current way has served them for a good period of time probably, and how it may be holding them back now. So the next step, once they're really aware of this current way, is to invite them to consider a new way of being in the topic, a new way of seeing, a new way of acting in the world or behaving, and a new way of assessing or checking how things are going. And if they buy into this move from a current way to a new way, then we basically develop specific practices for them, for the client, in the topic that will allow them to meet some developmental objectives and gradually develop into this new way of being and seeing. I guess I could say this about the United States and soccer, because I agree with you that soccer is definitely the most popular sport on the planet, and in the United States it's definitely not. And so it's more popular now than it was, I think, 30 years ago, especially because of youth soccer. But it's not. There's a certain, I would call that the second person, or the cultural quadrant, to look at Ken's model, and the cultural development there. There's a real bias in our country toward football, baseball, and basketball, and that still hasn't been moved to catch up with the rest of the world. Not that it's a race. In terms of the popularity of soccer, although there is definitely a movement there, but that's definitely a cultural bias that Americans have. I think probably because it wasn't our game. Baseball, football, and basketball were developed here, and soccer wasn't. So I think there might be a little territoriality there as well.
Okay, Reggie, thank you for being our guest.
Yeah, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
Reggie, as I listen to you each time you and I talk, or when you and I and Bob talk, and you talk about integral coaching, I get so excited. I mean, Bob tells me, Chris, is there a training in the world that you haven't taken? When you describe this, because I'm always looking for ways to be more self-aware, to really just operate with more ease in the world. And certainly when you describe integral coaching, where can I get some of that? Where can I learn more? And, your journey from teacher to coach with sports, with the poetry, you incorporate so much of your own personal being into it. I see how the integral coaching fits you. And I have not yet coached with you or taken your workshops, but I'm right here and now saying it's on my list. Reggie, tell us, how do you work? How could our listeners work with you? How can they contact you?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Christine. The easiest way to get in touch is through my website, which is my name, Reggie, Reggie, Marra, MARRA.com. And then there's another website up, the Quality of Effort, qualityofeffort.com. You can Google either one of those and find me pretty easily. And I work with individual clients, and I also do workshops. Most recently I've done some work in Newtown with poetry writing for adults as they continue to move through the difficulty they had back in December over a year ago. So I work in a variety of modalities, individual coaching and group workshop sessions, both with the integral model and with poetry, and I'm gradually learning to integrate those as well so that my poetry writing workshops are integrated and that my integral coaching uses some poetry as well.
Okay, excellent. So for those of you who would like to work with Reggie personally or learn more about what he does, you can go to his websites, reggiemarra.com. That's ReggieMarra.com, and qualityofeffort.com. That's qualityofeffort.com. Thank you so much, Reggie.
You're very welcome, Christine.
Reggie, before we started today, you mentioned that of course the tragic events that happened in Newtown, that you were involved in a TV show or something, or a radio show. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, thanks. Through my work in Newtown, I did some poetry writing workshops there, again with adults. I was invited to record a local community television show on the transformative potential of integral coaching and poetry writing. And that aired for the first time this past Wednesday evening. It'll air 4 times in a local community television station here in Connecticut. And then after the 4th airing, which will be next Saturday, I believe the 21st, it'll be available on YouTube as well. And I'll do my best to make sure that gets spread around as many places as I possibly can.
Okay, wonderful, Reggie. What final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
Probably that we all suffer and struggle at some point in our lives. Nobody escapes that, and that development and moving through our struggle and suffering is definitely possible. My experience is that self-awareness first, and then self-compassion and self-love are essential, whether we can manifest those ourselves or with the help of family, friends, a coach, a therapist. But asking for what we need and making sure we do that with a great deal of self-compassion and self-love is essential for our individual and our collective journeys.
Wonderful, Reggie. I want to thank you for coming to our guest today and interviewing with us. I want to thank our audience for listening. And for Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.